Nehemiah chapter 13 is an amazing lesson of leadership and how leadership can become too flexible at the point of forgetting God's will and allowing God's enemies to take control of what would belong to God. And here we see the high priest Eliashib, who would have authority over their storerooms. Well, the storerooms were places or rooms in which tithes and offerings and the holy things were kept for the use of the temple, and also for paying the Levites, the gatekeepers, the musicians in the temple. And this Eliashib, this high priest, was a very flexible person in terms of his spiritual life. He would belong to that kind of people who say, no, this law it's not applicable for today. You must have you must be an open-minded person. You are too much closed. I am an open-minded person. And he allowed his son to marry Tobiah's daughter. Tobiah was against the restoration of Jerusalem. He was an Ammonite, and the Ammonites were forbidden by God to step in the temple. But he not only allowed Tobiah to come to the temple, but also he chose the storerooms of the temple and prepared a large room for Tobiah to be there. And he was not looking over the sustenance of the Levites and the gatekeepers and the musicians. And maybe he was enriched himself. He was making himself fat with some offerings and tithes that were coming, but he was not distributing. That storehouse principle, which presupposes that all resources will come to one place and then will be equally distributed, that he was not using that principle. He was no longer using. It was according to God's will, and he would not care about God's desire about that. So the consequence was that the Levites, the other Levites, the gatekeeper, the musicians, needed to leave Jerusalem and go back to their fields to have their plantations in order to survive. And so the work of the temple was impaired. And then Nehemiah comes and he sees the situation, and he was a very committed person, and he then takes all the belongings of Tobiah and threw them out of the temple, and he restores all things, and he warns Eliashib not to do that again. And then the Bible says here that tithes and offerings started to come again, because people were no longer giving tithes and offerings. And this high priest, even though he was in a very high position, he was a man that will not know God. He will not work for God. He will work out of convenience. His question was not, what is God's way to do that? His question was, how can I please men? How can I please those who are wealthy? How can I please those who are in high places of authority? But I am not caring about God. This was his behavior. And maybe we can see leaders as Eliashib today. And we also can find leaders like Nehemiah today. If you are a leader of the church, ask God, and I must do the same, ask God for you to be like Nehemiah, not like Eliashib, to look for God's will and for his ordinances first, than looking for comfort or convenience. May the Lord use you to restore what is right in his temple, and starting in your own family. Okay? God bless you.